On the glossy brochure, she looked like victory. Dark blazer, white blouse, a careful curl escaping the bun at her neck. The photographer had angled her body toward the camera, set her between two silver-haired partners, and flooded the conference room with warm light. On the mock-up, the marketing team placed her in the very center, right below the slogan about commitment to inclusion. When Amara first saw that brochure, her stomach tightened in a way she did not admit to anyone. There he was, the only black associate in a firm perched high over the city, framed as proof that the firm had changed with the times. Underneath her picture, clients would read about diversity, opportunity, community partnerships. None of those words described her actual days. She had arrived at the firm with every credential they insisted mattered. Top 10 law school, law review, federal clerkship, trial advocacy awards. The path had cost her sleep, friendships, and a version of herself that believed talent alone could bend a room. The first months, she stayed late, turned every assignment faster than expected, fixed senior associates' drafts without complaint. Her name appeared on memos, never on the final signature lines. She told herself it was a matter of time. There was always another year, another review, another chance to be seen. The reviews came. They praised her work ethic, her professionalism, her calm presence. They said her writing was strong, her research airtight, her judgment mature. On the final page, they added the same sentence in slightly different words. She needed to work on her fit with the firm's culture. Fit, apparently, meant knowing how to laugh when the jokes in the break room landed on people who looked like her. She noticed how the partners used her presence. Recruiting season arrived, and suddenly Amara's calendar filled with coffee chats and diversity dinners. Photos from these events appeared on the firm website. She was always near the center of the frame, next to reception desks and buffet tables, surrounded by smiling faces a few shades lighter than hers. In the office, though, she often spent long afternoons alone in a windowless room, reviewing documents that no one else wanted to touch. She watched who got real opportunities. On the big securities cases, young associates argued motions, took depositions, traveled to meet clients. When a major hospital system faced a risk management crisis, a white associate with less experience than she had was sent to sit second chair in front of a judge who frightened everyone. Partners called that associate bold and promising. They described Amara as steady and reassuring, the kind of person who made clients feel comfortable when they visited the office. Comfort, she realized, meant they liked walking past her desk and seeing that someone like her existed inside their glass tower. It did not mean they trusted her at the podium. The turning point did not look big at first. One afternoon, while she was neck-deep in an endless employment case, a marketing assistant rushed into her office holding a garment bag and a flyer. The firm needed one more photograph for an upcoming campaign. They wanted a shot of her standing in front of the courthouse, briefcase in hand, as if she were walking out after a win. The assistant's voice was full of urgency. The photographer was already outside. The brochure deadline was looming. The managing partner personally wanted Amara on this page because it sent the right message. She had a half-finished motion on her screen, a client waiting for a strategy update, and a brain humming with case law. All of that was suddenly lower priority than a staged image of her as proof of progress. She walked to the restroom, hung the garment bag on the hook, and stared at herself in the mirror. The firm loved the idea of her, she realized. Not the grit, not the late nights, not the outlines that had carried exhausted colleagues through hearings. They loved the picture of a black woman in their hallways, the way it softened their edges. That day, she smiled for the camera because she did not yet know another way. The photographer praised her posture, encouraged her to look fierce, told her she was killing it. She went back upstairs to her small office, watched the photographer pack up in the plaza below, and felt as if she had just participated in something that took more from her than it gave. Life moved on. Cases shuffled. Emails multiplied. Then the firm's biggest client caught fire. The client was a national restaurant chain that prided itself on polished service and upbeat commercials. For years, it had been the firm's golden account, the name everyone said with a little more care. The firm handled its contracts, its acquisitions, its minor injuries. The bills went out smoothly. The checks arrived on time. One evening, a video leaked. Amara watched it on her phone in bed, the blue light painting her ceiling. A black server in a company uniform stood in a storage hallway, cornered by a manager and another employee. The manager's voice was raised. The words were coated with contempt about hair, language, attitude. Another worker laughed in the background. The server's face went from disbelief to hurt to rage, then to the flat, dangerous emptiness that appears when someone runs out of ways to be polite. The clip spread across platforms in hours. People called for boycotts, protests, investigations. Former employees shared stories about a corporate culture where black workers received the worst shifts, the worst sections, the slowest promotions. Within days, the chain faced a class action discrimination lawsuit. Commentators speculated about its survival. The shareholder calls turned tense. Inside the firm, fear spread quieter, but just as quickly. The case was too big to lose. Other clients watched. So did the media. A misstep could stain the firm's reputation for years. A meeting was called in the largest conference room. Partners crowded around the table. Senior associates lined the walls. Screens flickered to life with legal briefs, news articles, social media trends. Amara almost did not receive the invitation. It landed in her inbox 10 minutes before the start time, sent by a junior partner whose messages always arrived at the last possible moment. She wheeled her chair away from the stack of discovery responses on her desk and hurried through the maze of glass doors, heart already beating too fast. When she slipped into the room, the first thing she noticed was the silence that followed. She recognized a pattern now. When the firm needed to display diversity, she was invited early and given a seat near the center. When it wanted to make actual decisions, she was either left off or brought in so late that she had no time to prepare. This time, however, something else hung in the air. On the far wall, the leaked video played on a loop with the sound off. Even without audio, the hostility was unmistakable. Someone had enlarged a still frame that captured the server's expression at the exact moment humiliation cracked into anger. In that face, Amara recognized cousins, friends, versions of herself she kept buried beneath polite smiles. The partners argued. Some wanted to settle quickly and quietly. Others insisted the plaintiffs were exaggerating and that the social media outrage would burn out. A few muttered about false narratives and opportunistic lawsuits. A crisis management consultant dialed in through a speakerphone and recommended a strategy that sounded like a focus group apology tour. Commercials with diverse employees, community donations, training modules. No one asked Amara what she thought. She sat halfway down the table, hands folded in her lap, the only black person in a room deciding the value of black workers' pain. The irony scraped at her skin. Her title said, Associate, yet she felt like the same image on that brochure, present, displayed, fundamentally unheard. The client's general counsel joined the meeting midway. Her voice through the line was steady but strained. She demanded certainty. She wanted to know how the firm would keep the class action from turning into a public execution. At some point, as the conversation circled and frayed, the managing partner glanced toward Amara. It was a brief look, almost reflexive, a visual reminder that someone like her existed in the room. Something in her decided that this was the moment. She asked for the floor. Every head turned. Her heart pounded against the inside of her ribs so loudly she felt sure the microphones would pick it up. For a flicker of a second, she considered staying silent, letting the opportunity pass. Silence had protected her before. It had also eaten her alive. She began speaking, slowly at first, then with a momentum that surprised even her. She talked about what juries saw when they watched a video like that. She explained how every raised eyebrow and tightened fist would land on people who had spent their lives navigating those exact insults. She pointed out that the firm's usual strategy, dismissing everything as overblown, would sound, to any black worker on that jury, exactly like the managers in the clip. She had no script. Years of microaggressions became case law in her mouth. Every late-night memo, every clipped performance review, every supposed compliment about how well she spoke coalesced into a single argument. If the firm treated this case as a PR problem instead of a moral one, the jury would burn them down. The room stayed silent as she talked. She shifted from analysis to plan. They needed to acknowledge the harm in concrete ways, not just with prepared statements. They had to find the strongest stories among the plaintiffs, not to crush them, but to understand what the chain had actually done. They needed to investigate their own client as thoroughly as they would any opposing party. They had to build a settlement structure that recognized patterns, not just individual complaints. By the time she finished, her hands were trembling under the table. No one applauded. This was not that kind of meeting. What happened instead was more subtle. The general counsel, still on the line, requested that the person who had just spoken be put in charge of the case strategy. She said she wanted the associate who understood how this looked from the perspective of people who had lived it. She reminded the room that the lawsuit was not just about statutes, but about stories, and the firm needed someone who could read both. The managing partner hesitated a fraction of a second. This class action was the kind of case careers were built on. Traditionally, it would have gone to someone who already had their name on several plaques. In that pause, Amara's entire career teetered. Then he agreed. Officially, she became co-lead on the case, second to a partner whose ego filled entire hallways. Unofficially, she was the one everyone watched when questions of race and power came up. Half the firm expected her to fail, whether they admitted it or not. The other half quietly hoped she would not. The next months were brutal. She flew to different cities, sat in hotel conference rooms where plaintiffs told stories that felt painfully familiar. She read internal emails from managers who could have been the ones in that video, complaining about attitude and tone, using the same phrases she had seen, softer but similar, in her own reviews. At night, in anonymous rooms with beige walls, she lay awake and wondered whether she was defending the right people. She represented the chain and the firm that paid her salary, yet the faces across the table looked far more like her family than the faces sitting next to her in court would. She considered leaving more than once. The turning point came in a late deposition of a regional manager. The man arrived with a practiced smile and a long, rehearsed narrative about misunderstandings. He insisted he had always supported his staff, that the video had been taken out of context, that disgruntled employees had twisted his words. He performed contrition without ever touching accountability. As Amara questioned him, she felt the old anger rise, the same knot from the brochure shoot, the same heat from office jokes. This time, she did not swallow it. She converted it into focus. She walked him through each phrase he had used in performance reviews. She matched them to disciplinary decisions and pay gaps. She pushed, gently at first, then harder, on why certain workers were always labeled difficult while others, with the same complaints, were called passionate. The manager grew defensive. His mask slipped. In front of the court reporter and lawyers on both sides, he admitted that he sometimes assumed black workers were more likely to make customers uncomfortable. He justified it with talk about demographics and brand perception. He did not realize, until the silence settled after his words, what he had just confessed. That transcript became the spine of the case. When settlement talks resumed, the plaintiffs had leverage sharper than any press release. The chain, suddenly aware of how a jury would react to a manager calmly connecting black skin to bad business, agreed to terms that were far more sweeping than they had planned. The agreement did not just move money. It rewrote promotion policies, required oversight committees with independent voices, created training developed by people outside the company's bubble. It bound the chain to periodic public reporting about equity in its workforce. For the firm, the outcome was a paradoxical win. The client stayed. The public saw real changes. Media coverage focused on the reforms more than the scandal. Other companies took note and called the firm for advice on cleaning their own houses before lawsuits erupted. Inside the firm, though, another negotiation was waiting. Amara knew what would happen next if she did nothing. The partners would take victory laps. They would tell clients that their brilliant team had navigated a treacherous crisis. They would call her contribution invaluable in private and return her to quiet, invisible work in public. She rehearsed conversations in her head the way she once rehearsed mock trial arguments. This time, there would be no jury watching, only a cluster of people who had benefited from her labor without fully seeing her. She requested a meeting with the managing partner and the head of litigation. No one could remember an associate making that kind of request before. Senior lawyers murmured that she was brave. A few whispered that she was reckless. In the meeting, she did not raise her voice. She laid out numbers, billable hours, travel days, memos drafted, depositions taken. She compared those to years when she had been passed over for opportunities. She reminded them whose words had shifted the general counsel during that first strategy session. She described what it felt like to be paraded in front of cameras while being omitted from real decisions. She said she would no longer function as decoration. Then she presented her terms. She wanted a clear path to partnership with a timeline and benchmarks that could not be quietly moved. She wanted meaningful authority in cases where the firm leaned on her expertise and identity. She insisted the firm implement internal systems similar to those it had just forced on its client, bias training that actually confronted uncomfortable truths, review processes that did not penalize people for failing to resemble the majority. She did not threaten to leave. She did not need to. They had watched her hold their biggest client during a storm. They knew other firms and other kinds of work would welcome someone with her record. There was a long pause after she finished. In that silence, she recognized their fear, both of losing her and of admitting how much they had relied on her image without honoring her reality. They agreed, piece by piece. The partnership track accelerated, with her name appearing on internal lists that had previously skipped past her. She was placed as lead on new civil rights and employment matters, cases the firm had once outsourced. A small, mixed-race team was created around her, staffed with associates who did not want to wait a decade to be heard. The marketing department, sheepish now, asked whether she would approve future uses of her photo and story. She insisted that if her image appeared on diversity pages, the text next to it would include action, pro bono hours, systemic changes, concrete commitments. Years later, when young black law students scrolled through the firm's website, they saw more than a polished brochure. They read about an associate who had become a partner by refusing to remain decor, who had turned a crisis into leverage, who had forced the hallways behind the glass to bend, even slightly, toward something fairer. They came to summer programs and noticed something else. In meetings, when difficult subjects arose, conversations did not automatically slide past them. People did not assume the room was safe simply because a single black lawyer sat within it. They looked to Amara not as proof that the firm was already good, but as a leader who kept asking whether it could be better. She had saved them in court, yes, but more importantly, she had saved herself from becoming the picture on the brochure and nothing more. She had ripped away the frame and stepped out, carrying with her the kind of power they had never meant to give, yet could no longer take back.